The preparation of elite army units and government secret service agents would be amongst the most sophisticated training systems in the world. Different countries have a different tradition and methodology of training those who defend their honor and protect their leaders. It is a dangerous job that is done by the crème de la crème of military personnel, spies, special agents, and other people of such ilk. The bigger the influence of the nation and the more paranoid the leader, the more refined the selection and training process of their security. It is not a surprise that the bodyguards of Joseph Stalin in USSR stand amongst the most famous and the most impressive around the world. One of the most dangerous positions you could hold in Stalin's Soviet Union was being close to Stalin. His guards weren't just there to protect him. They were also trapped in his orbit. Watched, tested, always a wrong word or sideways glance away from being sent to Siberia. Still, they trained obsessively to keep him alive. Their job required a very particular kind of a person with extremely agile body and even more agile mind. The physical preparation of the men who did this job is amongst the most interesting and efficient in the entire world. The unit responsible for Stalin's personal security was the 9th Directorate of the NKVD. It was a legendary unit that was incredibly hard to get into. The selection process was meticulous, much more difficult than getting even into the ranks of top military units or even astronauts. Height requirements started from 180 centimeters, so the guard could cover Stalin with his whole body. They must have been in perfect health, possess lightning-fine reaction, and most importantly, a crystal-clear biography. Even if your second cousin lived in fraternal Poland, it was a huge minus in your personal life. These men weren't muscle-bound bouncers or soldiers pulled from the front lines. They were selected based on physical adaptability, discretion, and mental discipline. They had to blend in, never be the loudest, never draw attention. When talking about bodyguards, many immediately imagine guys in dark glasses who flicker in American action films. In Soviet Union, everything was different. They were called shadow people, and they formed part of a system that worked like clockwork. No posing, only stern practicality and unconditional devotion to the motherland. These were not just fighters, they were intellectuals in military uniforms, capable of thinking several moves ahead. They were recruited from the most proven personnel, most often from the KGB, sometimes from army intelligence, but only those who had gone through all the circles of hell of training entered the ranks of Stalin's private security. For these men, the safety of the leader was not just a job, it was the meaning of their entire life. Back then, they didn't have any cutting-edge communications equipment, just eyes, ears, and intuition. They worked ahead, noticing every little thing, a glance in the crowd, a slightly nervous movement, even uneven breathing. These men were machines that worked finer than a Swiss army knife, without misfire. Such elevated physical abilities required rigorous preparation. After the stringent selection process, the candidates had to be properly prepared. The training of such specialists did not begin with a gym with exercise machines, but with strict discipline and, most importantly, ideological training. They were taught that they were the shield of the country, that their lives belonged to the state. No personal ambitions, only service. This was the foundation without which it was pointless to move forward. Stalin's guards trained for physical fluency, not brute strength. The ideal was to move well. They were after efficiency and precision. Their training mixed military-style conditioning with the roots of Sambo, which was still evolving in the 1930s. They drilled falling, from standing, kneeling, running, and with minimal noise. How to absorb impact through muscle tension and breath timing. They practiced how to enter and exit rooms silently, scanning corners without turning their heads. They trained not only for confrontation, but for anticipation. Most of their training happened in confined spaces and not in the gyms. They would drill their routines in offices, kitchens, train cars, etc. A lot of it looked like a dress rehearsal. One guard would play Stalin. The others would practice shielding, guiding, and evacuating him. They choreographed routes through buildings with dozens of contingencies, trying to account for every possible variable that might have occurred in the real world. Drills were not open-ended. They had specific outcomes. Get the principal into a vehicle in under 6 seconds. Block a knife attack from a seated position without the attacker making noise. Move Stalin through a crowd without ever showing your firearm. One former bodyguard described practicing the same hallway movement 300 times a week. The focus wasn't on speed alone, it was about smoothness. The kind of smoothness that makes you invisible. They didn't just train the body, there was deep work on emotional regulation. Imagine this. You're guarding a man who is capable of having you shot for glancing the wrong way. And yet, you have to stay relaxed, alert, and polite in his presence every hour of every day. To build this kind of mental armor, training included long periods of silence and observation. They ran extended drills with no verbal communication. They practiced not blinking during sudden movements. They learned to control breath under pressure using box breathing techniques and slow exhales before simulated attacks. They were taught psychology and work on developing intuition. They had to read people like an open book, to notice the smallest details that could give away a threat. Unusual behavior, a hidden look, even too much excitement. They were taught observation skills that allowed them to see what an ordinary person did not notice. Some guards were tested with stage attacks while off duty in order to keep them prepared and adaptable to the unpredictable. You'd never be told it was a drill. You just had to respond, and if you failed, you were not fit for the job. Knife defense was rarely about disarms. It focused on limb control, redirection, and quick exits. Seated defense was a priority. Stalin often met people at dinners. Guards needed to be able to intercept a hand reaching under a coat while pretending to be adjusting a fork. Shooting drills included accuracy under duress, but also movement under fire. One drill had them sprint down a hallway, drop to the floor, draw from concealment, and place 3 shots within 10 centimeters at 5 meters. All in under 6 seconds. Targets were sometimes swapped for dummies resembling Stalin. In the country where wrapping food in the newspaper with the image of the leader was a reason to be sent to concentration camp, miss was not an option. They did not only practice shooting to hit the target, but to shoot from any position, on the move, with one hand, in conditions of limited visibility, while protecting the object, and so on. They were taught to instantly assess the situation, to distinguish a real threat from a random noise. There is a story about how one such guard, during training, with his eyes closed, disassembled and assembled a Makarov pistol faster than an officer at a shooting range could aim. This is not a joke. This was the level of these people. They were taught to work in a team. There was no such thing as someone pulling the blanket over themselves. Everyone knew their place and their tasks and acted in sync with the others. It was a single, well-coordinated machine. If someone from the crowd made a sharp move, the whole group reacted instantly, blocking the leader. It was a system where every screw was in its place and worked without failures. Another usual practice included lifting and moving Stalin. Not hypothetically, actual carries, dozens of variation. Over the shoulder, cradle carry, drag with minimal friction, with a theme, solo, under fire, through doorways, into bunkers, upstairs. Everything was accounted for. They also trained against actual fire. Smoke drills were common. Rooms would be filled with smoke grenades, and they'd have to locate Stalin or a dummy, evacuate, and suppress the imaginary threat all at once. Poisoning scenarios were another layer. Guards monitored food and water, learned symptom spotting, and trained response timing. How long after exposure could you remove Stalin from the scene, administer aid, and lock down the entire perimeter? Their work was thankless, they remained in the shadows, but they knew that their service was a guarantee of stability in peace and the country. In the concept of USSR, ideological firmness is in the core of the functioning of the apparatus. The men who guarded Stalin truly believed in their mission, but not always their loyalty was rewarded. Despite their fidelity and skills, no bodyguard was immune to Stalin's paranoia. His longest-serving bodyguard, Nikolai Vlasic, was with him for 25 years, lived near him, sat at his table. Yet in 1952, Vlasic was arrested under fabricated charges. Loyalty was no guarantee of safety. The story of General Vlasic is an example of true professional devotion of the assigned to his guard, and the testimony to the depth to which indoctrination in dictatorial regimes penetrates human mind. Nikolai Sidorovich preserved his loyalty even after his arrest and all the suffering he endured. In his memoirs, he wrote that, despite the cruel insult inflicted on him by Stalin, he did not hold a grudge against him, in his soul for a minute. Vlasic died in 1967, never having been rehabilitated during his lifetime. But the traditions he laid down in the security business remained strong for many years. Officers who went through the school of the state educational institution will later become teachers for those who will come to guard the next leaders of the country. The guards lived under the shadow of political purges and suspicion. Training wasn't just about combat, it was about cultivating a mindset of constant vigilance, not only against external threats, but also from within the regime itself. This created a paradox. The guards protected Stalin, but they also had to protect themselves from the very men they served. This is what made the mental training so severe. You were not just serving a leader, you were serving a system. Today's elite protection units in Russia, Israel, the United States still echo this model. Tight drills, silent movement, improvisation under pressure. Instructors from Russian Federal Protective Service, Israel's Shin Bet VIP Protection Unit, and even certain branches of the US Secret Service all emphasize principles that trace back to the old Soviet school: economy of motion, tension management, and training the nervous system to operate under extreme psychological load. Modern bodyguards don't just learn to shoot or fight. They are conditioned to anticipate subtle shifts in the atmosphere, read micro-expressions, and act decisively within a second of threat emergence. This kind of readiness has its roots in Soviet doctrine, where men like Vlasic developed routines that weren't about self-defense, but about placing another life above your own, without hesitation. Silent walk-in drills are still common, toe to heel, weight dispersed, breath matched to the step. Awareness training is built around scanning rooms without looking obvious, identifying exit points, potential threats, and escape routes in the first 10 seconds of entering any space. They train for invisibility, for acting without drawing attention. The same traits Vlasic's men practiced while standing behind Stalin in the dacha or beside him on a midnight walk. Mental endurance is also inherited. In Russia's modern FSO, elite guards undergo stress inoculation protocols. Through sleep deprivation, emotional provocation, controlled simulations of betrayal or chaos, in order to recreate the kind of internal pressure Vlasic's men lived under every single day. In Israel, protectors train to make ethical and tactical decisions in under 3 seconds under physical exhaustion. These are not theoretical drills. They are continuations of a legacy built in dark Soviet corridors where calm under Stalin's glare was the only thing standing between life and death. Because back then, the consequences of error were immediate and personal. Your own life was a collateral. This wasn't training for fitness or sport. It was survival training under tyranny, and it had to use the absolute best tools to keep the life of the leader sealed behind this men's backs. It was a strange and brutal dance between efficiency and fear, a choreography born not in academies, but in the cold shadow of power. These men weren't famous, their names are mostly lost, but the way they moved and what they trained for offers us a rare glimpse into the choreography of control. not only of protecting a leader, but protecting oneself from the regime. Sometimes the most interesting stories and the most fascinating methodologies of movement come from those who had no choice but to get it right.